Hello, my name is State Representative Lisa Sobecki, and it is my privilege as chair of the Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus to welcome you to the 2021 Women's Lobby Day. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed so much in our everyday lives across the country and here in Ohio. However, it has also brought into focus many challenges and inequalities women face each and every day. Women in Ohio continue to be paid less than their male co-workers for the same work. Young mothers and families struggle to afford childcare and feed their families. Despite those and other challenges, women in Ohio continue to rise up and overcome many obstacles. They are doing everything they can possibly do every day. It is our job as state lawmakers to ensure Ohio gives them the opportunity to build a life and succeed. Over the next 2 hours, you will hear from Ohio's elected leaders, trailblazing public servants, and the incredible members of the Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus. We will highlight the issues primarily impacting women throughout Ohio and our legislative solutions to those important problems. You will hear how women rise above challenges every day. You will learn that despite our challenges and hurdles uncovered by a once-in-a-century pandemic, women are still rising. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today. Enjoy the program.
Good morning. My name is Amelia Strong Sykes, and I'm the proud representative of Ohio's 34th District, the birthplace of champions, and I'm honored to serve as the minority leader in the Ohio House of Representatives. On behalf of the entire Ohio House Democratic Caucus, I'd like to welcome you to the 10th Annual Women's Lobby Day. Over the past 10 years, we've gathered to celebrate hard-fought victories and rallied to speak out against measures meant to keep us on the sidelines. Through it all, we've been resilient. Nowhere is this more apparent than in this past year, where women have been knocked back, but never knocked down. We have seen record job losses and business closures amid the economic uncertainty, far more than our male counterparts. And yet, women are still rising in Ohio and across the country. Our potential is limitless. Today, I am thankful for all of the resilient women still rising who have shown that we can overcome any obstacle put in our way. I would also like to thank my friend and colleague, Representative Lisa Sobecki, for organizing today's event. Her leadership and the leadership of every member of our Women's Caucus is helping to inspire a future where all of our daughters have the same opportunities as our sons. I thank you all for joining us today and hope that by coming together, Ohio's women will continue to rise. Thank you.
I'm Sheriff Brown. It's an honor to serve you in the United States Senate. Thank you, Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus, for the important work you do to move progressive values forward in our state. It's an honor to be with Chair Sobecki and so many women leading in our state. Look at the issues all of you are advocating for today, and it's so clear why representation matters, why we need leaders who reflect our state, why we need to hear women's voices in our state. Whether it's healthcare, education, protecting voting rights, supporting working parents, you push for the kind of progress on issues that matter to Ohio workers and to their families. We know the toll this pandemic has taken, especially on women and especially on women of color. Ask any mother how she's doing right now. Millions of women have been doing 3 jobs for the last year. They've been full-time caregivers and teachers and doing the job they had before this pandemic. And notice only one of those 3 jobs actually comes with a paycheck. For so many Ohioans, they can't do all 3. They've had to leave the paid labor market. It means more families are scraping by with less, trying to figure out how they'll pay the mortgage or pay for health insurance or pay for groceries this month. That's why your advocacy, your strong voices, your stories, your heartfelt stories matter so much. Share those stories with people in government at every level, from your senators all the way to your local commission, county commission, or town council. Stories are how you move people, how we create change. I'll close with a brief story. Every year, I've begun this tradition with former senator from Alabama, and now I'm carrying it forward, where I choose 6 senators, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and we go to the Senate floor and we read Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail, the letter he wrote in 1963 on scraps of paper, when turning into one of the great documents of the civil rights era. And in the middle of the letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. King wrote, "Progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability." Dr. King understood, as all of you do, that we only move forward with the kind of activism that the Women's Legislative Caucus is involved in the kind of work you do. So thank you for being such great activists for the right direction for our state.
I am a woman still rising, and I will be reintroducing a bill that would create the Ohio Women's Policy and Research Commission that will focus on the advancement of women in Ohio.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would expand the eligibility for children with medical handicaps. By helping our most vulnerable continue the treatments that they need, we can take the burden off of caretakers, most often women.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would provide Medicaid reimbursement for doulas in Ohio.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would eliminate the statute of limitations on rape.
I am a woman still rising, and I am working to ensure that survivors of domestic violence can receive unemployment compensation.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced House Bill 199, which would remove the damages cap on non-economic losses when rape or sexual assault survivors bring a civil lawsuit. Allowing these survivors to collect the full compensation juries have awarded them means women who have been the victims of violent crimes receive full justice.
I am a woman still rising, and that's why I introduced legislation to end the statute of limitations for victims of sexual assault and rape.
I think we're having some technical difficulties here this morning. Just give us 1 second, Rep House. We could not hear you. You still can't hear you now, so we'll just keep moving right along. This is the wonderful things with that we've all learned during the pandemic is how to be able to adjust during the time with going virtual and all these new technologies we have. We have Senator Teresa Fetter with us here too. I believe Senator Fetter can kick us off from here. Thank you. We'll have to take her off mute there. There we go.
Yes, boy, it's Monday, right? We must have had a wild Mother's Day weekend. Well, good afternoon, it's almost afternoon, so good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here to see you again. And we know that we make a significant contribution to our communities, our families, and the future. So I want to welcome you to the Economic Security for Women and Families. And I know we will be connected with Representative House here soon. I served with her mother, Annie, and I just want to make sure that you say hi to your mom for me, Representative House. We're pleased to have our guests here today. And if Rep House is available right now, I'd like for you to go ahead and introduce them.
All right, good morning. It does seem my way is, so you do hear me? Okay, great. All righty. Well, we're just going to get right into the conversation. We have a group, 3 phenomenal women who are working in policy to really break down when we talk about economic security for women and families, what that actually means. Today we have Ms. Hope Lane. She is the Public Policy and External Affairs Associate at the Center for Community Solutions, and she'll be talking about public benefits here in Ohio. After Ms. Lane, we will have Holly Hankinson, the Advocacy Director at the Women's Fund of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, who will be talking about child care, pay equity, and the effects of what is known as the cliff effect. And then finally, we have Ms. Jasmine Henderson, Director of Policy and Social Impact at the Ohio Women's Alliance. She'll be talking about our economic recovery and what that looks like for women. So again, panelists, thank you so much for joining us. Ms. Lane, why don't you start?
Thank you, Representative House. Can everyone hear me? Good, awesome. All right, so I am a recovering House staffer myself, and I worked with Representative House in the past. I'm just so happy and so lucky to be here this morning with you all. I have been with the Center for Community Solutions for about 2 years now. Primarily on issues of maternal and infant health, as well as the issues of public benefits, specifically SNAP. So today I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of background about SNAP, and that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also oftentimes called food stamps, and how this program impacts women, and also a little bit about WIC. If we want to start with WIC this morning, WIC is the federal program that is targeted at pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and their children up to 5 years old. And WIC in this country, but especially in Ohio, is incredibly underutilized, and mostly because of its because it is antiquated in its operations. And so WIC and SNAP are both incredible work supports in this state and in this country that are often at attack. And so we often find ourselves in the policy space trying to find ways to just kind of play defense instead of offense. And so SNAP and WIC are both federally funded programs that are state administered. So oftentimes there is little that can be done on the policy side on the state level, but on the federal level, as where the money is, but on the state level, a lot of policies, state policies, such as like Senate Bill 17, which I know we're going to get into legislation a little bit later, as well as House Bill 288, which would add a photo ID to the front of SNAP cards, would immensely impact women and families in our state. And I know that Representative House, she was muted, but I think she was talking a little bit about economic security for women in our state. And I just want to say SNAP and WIC are critical to the economic security and well-being of women and families in our state. 1/2 of children in the United States will receive SNAP at some point during their childhood. 1/2 of all adults will do so at some point between the ages of 20 and 65. Women are 63% of all adult SNAP recipients, and 44% of SNAP recipients are children. And 58% of all SNAP households with children are headed by a single adult, 92% of them by women. And so when we talk about SNAP, we often think about the narrative is about this like welfare queen that, you know, is antiquated and, you know, pulling up in a Cadillac and abusing the system and this whole idea of just abuse of this federal program and taxpayer dollars. But what people fail to realize is SNAP is a work support, as I mentioned earlier. It's a work support. There are work requirements. There are time limits for those who are not working. And so when we talk about SNAP and food security, we need to talk about it in the sense that this is supplemental. This is for people that are working. And we really, I think as a society, especially when it comes to women, we fail to understand the connection between public benefits and work supports and working, because the idea is that somebody is sitting at home on their couch and collecting benefits, and that's just not the case, and it's just not true. And so I know that I think we know here on this call that SNAP leads to improved health outcomes for families, as well as improved education, economic self-sufficiency, and other positive outcomes for children who grew up in families with low incomes. And so this morning, I just wanted to touch on those things a little bit. And I think I will pass on to the next panelist.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lane, for that information. Next, we will have Ms. Holly Hankinson. Again, she's the Advocacy Director at the Women's Fund of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Good morning, Holly.
Good morning. Thank you so much to everyone, and to Representative Howes and Senator Fetter for moderating today. I'm very grateful to be here to talk about women's economic security. So as Representative Howes mentioned, I'm Holly Hankinson. I'm the Advocacy Director at the Women's Fund of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. I'm going to talk a little bit of background on pay equity, wages and the cliff effect, and childcare. And I understand we're going to get into some solutions later on. So just get started. So even before COVID, we know that women, and especially women of color, face large economic disparities. Nationally, women are paid 82 cents for every dollar made by a white man, with Black women making 63 cents and Latinas 55 cents. We know this gap starts young and grows over time. It also exists at every education level. So contrary to the belief that education is the great equalizer, it is not. It actually widens the more degrees you get. So over a 40-year career, this wage gap costs women $406,280 in wages alone. And we know this is just wages. This is not total wealth, which is much greater. We also know that occupational segregation is a really important factor here. Women and men do not hold jobs equitably in every occupation. It's sometimes talked about or suggested that women choose low-paying jobs, and sort of that's why women sort of make less money. But historical data suggests that, in fact, the jobs are valued and paid less because women are doing the jobs. So when a woman enters a field, wages go down. And when men enter it, sometimes the wages actually increase. So we've seen that a number of times. So one example is in public education, when it became mandatory, 100, 150 years ago, they needed to find workers. And so they found women because they needed a lot of workers really quickly. And so they paid very, very little money. So that was when women entering the field. Before that, men were teachers and were made much more. We've also seen that with coding. So that coding used to be women's work. It was, used to be a job that they hired predominantly women to do. Over time, they hired more men into the field and the wages went up. And we're seeing it happening today with the nursing industry. So, 20, 30 years ago, women were predominantly nurses. Now men are entering the field in larger numbers and the wages are going up. So just a few examples. Before COVID, we know women were worked in low wage jobs. 46% of women worked in low wage jobs. And this averaged just $10.93 per hour. So that was almost half of women overall, and includes 54% of Black women and 64% of Hispanic or Latino women. So because of these high numbers of women working in low wage jobs, women, as Hope mentioned, also are disproportionately relying on public benefits. So this includes SNAP, TANF, Medicaid, housing vouchers, and all these are meant to be a safety net to provide stability as people work their way out of poverty. But as we've heard from a lot of people and women over the years, they're working harder and harder and just can't seem to get ahead. It's because these benefit systems are very complicated, and there are many places sort of along the path where women or people face a cliff where they might receive a small raise or promotion at work and get a little bit more money, but this raise triggers an entire cutoff of their entire benefit, and it puts them in a worse financial position than before. So these issues are what women have been facing for decades. And then the pandemic happened. And then what we saw was that our systems failed the stress test. So women were hit first and hit hardest because of the pandemic. So we know that women, since the pandemic, have quit the labor force at twice the rate of men. And there are a number of reasons why. One, again, is occupational segregation. More women will work in industries hit hardest by COVID, like leisure and hospitality. Black women specifically are overrepresented in these industries, and we're also more likely to hold jobs as essential workers in the healthcare and food supply industries. The other major reason why women were impacted by the pandemic is childcare. Of the millions of people who stopped working in the past year, women ages 25 to 44 are nearly 3 times as likely as men to not be working because of childcare demands. So women left, and they left because of childcare. The average cost of childcare for a 4-year-old in Ohio is almost $8,000 a year. This is a huge burden for all families, in particular low-wage families. And the pandemic has made it even more difficult to find safe and affordable care because of this huge burden. And we've also lost so many providers. As of December, there were over 165,000 fewer childcare workers nationally than the year before. And it's been predicted that almost 4.5 million childcare slots across the country could be permanently lost due to COVID. So there are a lot of compounding issues here, and there's not sort of one magic solution. But we need to start by recognizing that this isn't just an issue for women and families, it's a workforce issue. It's an economic issue. In order for our society to move forward, in Ohio to move forward and thrive, we need to focus on economic security for women and families. So I'm really thankful and grateful you guys are, everyone's talking about this today.
Thank you so much for sharing that information, Holly. We really, really appreciate it. Next up, we will have Ms. Jasmine Henderson. She is the Director of Policy and Social Impact at the Ohio Women's Alliance. And Jasmine is going to get into a little bit of the diversity and economic security, and specifically its impact on women, but particularly women within our Black and Brown communities. So Jasmine, take it away.
Thank you, Representative House, and also thank you, Senator Fetter, for inviting all of us to the call today. Again, my name is Jasmine Henderson, and I'm the Director of Policy and Social Impact for the Ohio Women's Alliance. And as Representative House stated, I'll be talking about the specific impacts that our economy here in Ohio has on Black and Brown women and their families. I just wanted to highlight and emphasize, women are absolutely, just based on our sheer numbers, statistically speaking, we drive the economy in Ohio. So a lot of times when we're talking about the economy and what that means, we're often leaving out women and femmes, but we're also leaving out the impact that Black women and Brown women have on the economy. Many are oftentimes heads of households, whether that means they are in a partnership or a marriage or not, that actually supplements the household. Many women are actually heads of households and making the economic decisions for their households, especially Black and Brown women. Many of them already before the pandemic were working in very hard, low wage jobs that disproportionately impacts Black and Brown women across the state. So with the impact of COVID literally changing the economic landscape of Ohio, what we're really seeing and what many of our studies are showing are that Black women and brown women are not able to meet the current standards and needs that they have to take care of their families up under the current economic landscape in Ohio. So I, at a previous job, actually had the wonderful opportunity to do a self-reporting survey that mostly focused on Black and brown women and the impacts that childcare had on them. And we are finding through this self-reported survey that many Black and brown women are having to make economically hard choices between in COVID as frontline workers, between if they should continue to be in a low wage job that often puts them and their families at risk, or if they're able to make the hard decision of trying to find adequate childcare right now while matriculating back through work. We also have to acknowledge that many of our caring economy jobs are actually run and supported by women of color. For example, the childcare industry. About in the 90th percentile, we're seeing that Black and brown women are absolutely not only community leaders, but economic leaders providing job opportunities through childcare, whether that is brick and mortar centers or whether that is home-based child care services. Black and brown women are leading in this industry. So when we are seeing an industry collectively that is built for women to be able to make better economic decisions for themselves, we're seeing that this industry is failing disproportionately. Also, many of the economic issues that Black and brown women faced around security, economic security, whether that means that was previously talked about, SNAP benefits and different things are underutilized, but we're also seeing that the pathways are too hard to navigate for women who may not have different type of infrastructures in place, such as stable internet or other viable means to be able to fill out the information and matriculate through the system, especially while COVID is taking place and many cannot take in-person meetings any longer in order to receive state subsidies that are very much so needed during this time. So in order to have a healthy Ohio economy, we often have to center our Black and brown women as they are actually leading the fight in many instances that keeps our economy healthy. Many Black and brown women are getting up and showing up to work every day. They're leading in our caring economy industries such as childcare, such as healthcare. Our Black and brown women are often our STNAs and our nurses' aides, our nurses who are taking care of our most vulnerable and our most sickly, especially during a time of a pandemic. And what we're seeing is that Black and brown women who are already having issues surviving and meeting basic necessities and basic needs before the pandemic are absolutely struggling now, while also having to be caretakers for their children, themselves, and also other family members, because we know that Black and brown women tend to live in multi-generational homes. So with that being said, I know we're going to get into more solutions about things that we could do immediately to help out Black and brown women across the state. But during this time, my main objective is to remind people that anytime we talk about economy, anytime we talk about economic needs, we absolutely need to center those who are most vulnerable while having those conversations, because many are struggling to keep up with the needs, but also while making sure that Ohio is healthy. So we need to make sure that the people who are strengthening our economy are actually having enough resources that trickles down to them in order to continue to make Ohio what it is today and to make a better future for Ohio. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, Hope. You did a great job really outlining the public benefits that women have and what they need and what is possible to help close the gap that we see right now. And Holly, you gave us some great statistics, like $10.93 an hour. That's just not even a livable wage for a teenager, let alone an individual and an individual with a family. So the cliff effect really has to have a strong narrative as we legislators are trying to really move legislation. And then Jasmine did a great job on the disparities, especially in the caregiving industries, essential workers. And so I have a question for you. What would you say if you could, influence the legislature, state legislature, or federal legislature, is the most immediate and urgent issue and need that we need to take care of for women to economically be secure moving out of this pandemic? And anyone can go first.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I will say, as I talked about a little bit in my part, that a lot of the times when it comes to public benefits, we're on the defense instead of offense. Senate Bill 22 specifically was passed back in, I believe, January because of a fight between the legislature and the governor's office over the rights to institute a public health emergency. So while like the Center for Community Solutions did not weigh in on that issue, we did find out later that I'll try to summarize very quickly, but currently SNAP recipients are receiving the maximum allotment, which is also called emergency allotments, so EAs. And the emergency allotments are tied to a state public health emergency being in effect and a federal public health emergency being in effect. And so we need the state public health emergency to be in effect for families to continue. Okay, sorry, I saw in the chat. So we need that state public health emergency to be in effect in order for families to keep receiving the emergency allotments for SNAP benefits. So to put this in perspective, the minimum SNAP benefit in Ohio is $16. So there are SNAP recipients that are receiving the minimum, which is $16. The emergency allotments are bringing those minimum people to $234 a month. While it's not always that big of a difference, that difference does exist. And so these emergency allotments are designed to help with this time for food insecurity and families struggling with food insecurity. And again, you need the state public health emergency to be in effect and a federal public health emergency to be in effect. The Biden administration has indicated that this federal public health emergency will be in effect through at least December 31st of 2021. And so many states are intending to keep theirs aligned with the federal public health emergency. In Ohio, our public health emergency is being threatened next month in June by the legislature. And our interest is solely to protect the public health emergency for the interests of SNAP beneficiaries. We know that the emergency allotments are not going to last forever, but we also know that we are still very much in the thick of a public health emergency. And we know that Ohioans absolutely need these emergency allotments. So that is the number one thing for me right now, is for the legislature to make a good decision on continuing the public health emergency next month.
Ladies, any other ideas of what would be an urgent most need for women to really move out of the pandemic economically secure?
I can jump in. I love this. I love being forced to choose one. I think that really helps you focus on what really is the issue. I think for me, what I would say is childcare. That is my sort of I think that is the most urgent need right now. I mean, we saw, what happened last year when this issue became real. The challenges of childcare became real for a lot of people across the state. It became a huge emergency, and we saw that, it caused a lot of women to leave the workforce because they simply couldn't, go to their jobs, and all the childcare centers closed and the schools shut down. And so we really saw the urgent need. So I think we really need to recognize that childcare is a basic infrastructure for our economy moving forward. It's what we need for everyone to be able to go back to work. We're seeing now businesses are struggling with hiring workers. We don't have necessarily the numbers of why yet, but I would imagine that childcare is a big piece of this. Women need childcare, families need childcare for them to both go back and reenter the workforce. So that would be sort of my issue. And I think it's both on the family side and also on the provider side. So I know providers are struggling, providers that are, a lot of the providers are women of color, Black and brown women, and, they, need increased reimbursement rates. They're receiving an increase in demand, and they've had a lot of requirements to shift their entire structure for the pandemic reasons to make sure that their facilities were safe and everyone was there were a lot of costs that went with that. And so I know we talked to a lot of providers that were doing everything that they could to try and make sure that they had all the safety precautions in place, and they, had all that prepared for all the kids that they were supporting. So our providers are under stress, our families are under stress. And I think moving forward, we have to prioritize that.
And then you talked about, Holly, the cliff effect, and Jasmine, you talked about Black and brown women and the areas that they serve. We know that companies and all kinds of businesses are raising, the salary to get people in. But for particular healthcare, childcare, they get the very low wage, and they also don't have health insurance or paid family leave. So as we're adjusting to this, do you see maybe that cliff having a bigger, more concentrated effect in any way?
I actually do. And the reason why I say that, I was previously a child care organizer in another life. So I worked with parents and I worked with providers and also children across the state of Ohio, determined what that meant. And so what we're looking at in the case of child care and the economic cliffs that they have is our providers actually, from a fiscal standpoint, because it costs about $10,001 per child per year for us to have children in any sort of ECE program across the state of Ohio, including PFCC or publicly funded childcare. What we're seeing is that our providers are actually receiving the extreme short end of the stick. So on top of having to absorb cost in an industry that is highly regulated, we're also seeing that providers are not actually generating enough money to be able to provide long-term and sustainable healthcare and also economic coverage to many of their staff members who are also typically women of color. And with that being said, when we have a service-based economy that is wholly for women and ran by women, we're seeing that women historically have less fiscal options across the board. And we're seeing that as women experience different intersections of oppression, so economically, racially, disability, etc., we're also seeing that these impacts in the geographical locations of where their child care centers are extreme predictions for if they're able to provide long-term sustainability. So in conjunction with us raising the eligibility rate, which is actually a bill on the table, which I'm very thankful for, to 200% for childcare, we actually need to take it a step further. We need to make sure that we have an infrastructure in the state of Ohio provided through Job and Family Services that provides more fiscal pathways around ownership and the business models of childcare. Because previously and over the past decade, what we've seen and what my reports have come back to is we've seen a hyper focus on child development, which is absolutely important in the childcare industry. But what we're doing and how we're really disservicing women of color is not providing infrastructures for appropriate business models. And so when we don't have appropriate business models, but we're expecting an infrastructure to support the economy of Ohio, what we're doing is we're really leaving gaps in our infrastructure that allows for our women of color business owners to fail in such an important industry. And so with that being said, we have to have a holistic approach to it around that specific model in conjunction to raising the eligibility rates, which will help parents and which will help children. We need to also remember that if we have an industry that's in the 90th percentile run by women of color, we actually have to meet the business models where those women are, because oftentimes in their communities, there are no viable pathways for sustainable business models that will allow them to be the leaders that they seek to be in their communities.
I think you all brought out some really good points. I think one thing that I've learned recently is, our country is woefully missing the mark on our GDP. And according to UN Women, increasing women's labor force participation rate, which means child care, adult care, because we take care of our elders as well, it can boost our GDP by over $6 trillion. Now, that will ring a bell for our male colleagues, right? That will, if we speak those terms in a lot of ways, our children, by closing the learning gaps, they're essentially, living in a recession their whole lives because they don't get a quality or adequate quality education. So we're missing these marks of GDP. And so I think we tie that narrative together. So I'm very excited about you bringing that expertise for us to articulate this narrative and tell our story of how we benefit and how much they need us. Now, the next question is, if the Ohio legislature only passed 3 bills this General Assembly to address economic security for women, which 3 bills should the legislature pass and why? These could be bills that are already introduced or bills that were introduced last General Assembly or bills that we need to introduce. So now you're going from choosing 1 bill to now 3.
Well, I can start because my first bill actually talks a lot about what Jasmine said, which is publicly funded childcare. We want to expand eligibility of this childcare. So when we talk about, we mentioned the cliffs before, when we talk about childcare, we talk a lot about the childcare. We call it like a donut hole because the eligibility to enter into childcare is 130%. So if you make below 130%, you're eligible for childcare. And once you're eligible, you can hold on to that eligibility for a pretty good amount of time. You can hold on to it until you're at 300% of poverty, which is a good safety net for people. The problem is right now is if you enter at 135% of poverty, you don't get access to those benefits at all. So there's House Bill 145, as Jasmine mentioned, which would increase that eligibility to 200% of poverty, which was my number 1 bill. The other bill related to that that we're going to be advocating for as well is a budget amendment in the Senate right now. It's a budget amendment 2363, and it would expand publicly funded childcare to 150% of FPL in the budget. So that, it's not 200%, which is our goal, but that, that's getting us part of the way there. So that's my first bill. I'd say my second bill would be one to address public benefit or the cliff effect and reforming public benefits. So, this one would probably be a new bill. I'm not sure if it's been introduced at all, but there are a number of states that have created sort of a statewide task force that looks comprehensively at the benefit systems and how they work together and what's sort of the best use of the money by centering the individuals instead of looking at all the programs disparately. So that's something that we've seen some success. I know there's a number of states in the Northeast who have taken this approach, and they're coming up with solutions for a lot of their benefits at once, which I would love to see Ohio do as well.
It looks like we're short on time, but I'm going to give 1 bill, which is the raising of the minimum wage. I believe it's House Bill 69, Representatives Kelly and Gerals, to get us to $15 an hour, and I believe by 2027. So that's my bill.
Mm-hmm.
I will follow suit and only acknowledge 1 bill because I had many that were that we could talk about. But honestly, for me, what is most important taking care of Black and brown women across the state is, number 1, the continuation of a moratorium around housing, and also like House Bill 182, which prevents or will prohibit discrimination of rental houses based upon income, is absolutely what Black and brown women need to be able to survive in this moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you, and I don't know if my counterpart is here, Representative House. Hi.
I am. So again, I want to, on behalf of our Women's Caucus, I want to thank each of you all, Hope, Holly, and Jasmine, and my mighty Senator Fetter for facilitating the Q&A. Thanks everyone for participating, and we look forward to what is next on this women's agenda. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful Monday.
Thank you so much, everyone.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill to recognize the full value and potential of Ohio's working women, the Ohio Equal Pay Act. Ohio's gender wage gap continues to hold back women, families, and our economy. We can't get ahead as a state if half our workforce is undervalued and underpaid.
I'm a woman rising, and I introduced House Bill 256, a bill that helps survivors of domestic violence and abuse escape their abuser and move to a safer home without facing burdens from landlords.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced Senate Bill 70, a bill that will prohibit the use of wage or salary history in hiring. Women continue to earn less than men for the same work, including wage history and hiring decisions that perpetrates a systemic issue. It's time we end it.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced the Crown Act to prohibit hair discrimination in Ohio.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would criminalize marital rape.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, representing Ohio's 9th Congressional District from Toledo to Cleveland. Thank you all so very much for the opportunity to address your 2021 Women's Lobby Day in Ohio. The fight for pay equity, economic security, and workforce development for women and families has never been more important, and there has never been more at stake. It's long past time that we as a state and as a country pass legislation that guarantees equal pay for equal work. Pay discrimination affects millions of working families, especially households that depend on a mother, grandmother, sister, or daughter for financial support. Unequal pay is not just wrong for our families, but for our community, our economy, and our country. It's bad for business. We need enforceable standards that ensure equal work receives equal pay. That's why I voted to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act just last month. Legislation that would ban wage discrimination on the basis of sex, including pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual characteristics. But it is on all of us at the local, state, and national level to keep fighting to move the ball forward. And that's why I'm so thankful for the work you are doing at the state capitol. The work you are putting in matters, and I stand with you in this fight every step of the way. Thank you for the work you are doing to make life better for all.
Good morning, Senator Williams.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am great. I think we are waiting for some other panelists to join us.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
Here they come. Good morning, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
So I am State Representative Kristen Boggs, and we are going to begin our panel on ensuring opportunity and fairness in the workplace. And I am going to kick it off to my esteemed colleague, Senator Sandra Williams, to get us started.
Well, ladies, I want to thank you all for being here today. We're going to open up with the panel introducing yourselves, and then I'm going to kick it back to Representative Boggs to welcome us all. So please tell us a little bit about yourself right now. Your name and where you're, what organization you're representing.
Okay, well, I can start. I'm Linda Caney, and I'm president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Central Ohio chapter. Wow. And we advocate unapologetically for Black women and girls in health, education, and economic empowerment. And I'm also a member of the Women's Public Policy Network.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tanya Salyers. I'm the communications manager for the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. We're a public foundation whose mission is to transform the lives of women and girls through social change. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ingalls. I am a union attorney at a local law firm called Bark and Meislish, and I'm also the board president of the Central Ohio Workers Center, which is a nonprofit that educates, empowers, and advocates for and with low-wage and immigrant workers here in Central Ohio. So thanks for the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Thank you for being here. And I am State Senator Sandra Williams. I represent the 21st Senate District, which is Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. Thank you so much. And Representative Boggs, I will turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you, ladies, for joining us on this really important conversation. I can't wait to hear your insight and about the work that you're doing. We know that prior to this year,
since the 1970s, women's participation in the workforce has been increasingly growing to the point where it reached 48% participation pre-COVID. And we know, though, that this year has been absolutely devastating for women and their economic security and their economic growth. And I think not only is that incredibly concerning for the women themselves, but we also know that since 1970, the largest gains economically that have been made to the middle class have been because of this increased participation of women in the workforce. And it's been because of the economic gains women have achieved. And so when we talk about women in the workforce, and when we talk about how catastrophic COVID has been for women, it's not just about women, it's about the entire middle class and the potential for a backslide of the entire middle class. And so I would love to kick it back to each of you to talk about the work of your organization and to help educate us further about the importance of addressing women's economic security and women's fairness so that they continue to work throughout these tough times.
Great. So I'll thank you, Representative Boggs, for that intro. I'm going to start and really just lay some groundwork about the economic status of women right now, especially as it relates to employment and unemployment numbers. I'm going to be sharing a lot of numbers, so I'm more than happy to share my sources and get these data points to anyone interested. I can be available for that. So in an economic fallout, unlike any in American history, women were not just kicked out of the labor force when jobs were cut. Many were forced to leave on their own because of gaps in the social safety net, like access to paid leave and childcare. The worst job losses began just 1 year ago in April of 2020, which kicked off the first women's recession, which is known now widely as the she-cession. That month, April 2020, 3.5 million moms of school-aged children shifted out of active work, moving into paid or unpaid leave, losing their jobs, or leaving the workforce entirely, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Nearly half of all working mothers were not working in April of 2020. The losses in that time were primarily in, women-dominated fields like hospitality, but the women's recession has continued even as those jobs have returned because of the unequal impact on women. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, many other countries were dealing with similar women's recessions, but few as severe as the United States. And that's because we have less flexibility to work from home, less access to paid leave, fewer furlough options that keep women employed while reducing their hours, and limited access to childcare is definitely a key driver. Despite 495,000 women returning to the labor force in March of 2021, meaning that they're either now working or actively looking for work, over 1.8 million fewer women are still out of the labor force compared to February of 2020, right before the pandemic started. It's also really important to note that reported unemployment rates do not capture people who have left the labor force entirely, as they're no longer counted among the unemployed. So if the 1.8 million women who left the labor force since February 2020 were counted as unemployed in March of 2021, some recent data that we have, women's unemployment rate would have been 8% in March instead of the 5.7% reported. So it's really important to remember when we're looking at a lot of these data points. Last month, April 2021, women gained 161,000 jobs. And as jobs trickle back, women will still need 28 months of job gains at that rate, that 161,000 jobs, to recover from their pandemic losses. And this is the most important piece. The unemployment rate masks even higher rates for Black women, Latinas, and other demographic groups. Women of color have been disproportionately impacted, especially knowing that long-standing circumstances, including low-wage jobs, no benefits, job insecurity, the pay gap, these are all things that made the impact of the pandemic more devastating to women of color, specifically Black women and Latinas. Since February of 2020, 552,000 Black women have left the labor force, along with 503,000 Latinas. Latinas had the highest unemployment rate of any group last year at 20.1% in April of 2020. About half of all Latinas have reduced their work hours or quit their jobs to take care of someone, compared to 29% of white women. Even as of last month, April 2021, the unemployment rate is 7.5% for Latinas, 8.6% for Black women, 6.1% for Asian women, and for white women, the rate is just over 5%. Additionally, many unemployed women as a whole have been out of work for 6 months or longer, and many of those who are working are not getting the hours that they need or that they want. And it's a clear sign of the lack of progress toward recovery for women, and especially for women of color. And we know this is happening in Ohio. 67% of frontline workers in Ohio are women. These were women working in healthcare, childcare, social services at your grocery store. And these are also many of the women who are least likely to have benefits like paid leave or affordable childcare. And unfortunately, we just don't have a complete picture yet. Disaggregated data by gender and race is really hard to come by, especially in Ohio. Until we can get disaggregated data about labor force participation, jobless claims, unemployment, it's going to be hard to understand exactly what women need, even though we have a good hunch. One thing we do know for certain is that women were not prepared to weather this storm. Our research at the Women's Fund on the Gender and Racial Wealth Gap highlighted several accelerators and barriers to closing the gap, many of which are exacerbated right now. From access to healthcare to our entire caregiving infrastructure, it's clear that these issues were present before the pandemic. And it's only now that we have this heightened attention to so many of these issues that many of my colleagues here today have been advocating for years. So I just urge us, as we continue this conversation, to look for these systemic and permanent policy solutions that can help Ohio women get back to work, and not just place a Band-Aid over what we've experienced over the last year. Thank you.
Linda, can you go next?
I certainly can, yes. Good morning, and thank you again to the members of the Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus. I'm certainly honored to have been asked to join this esteemed panel of powerful women, Tanya and Sarah, and I look forward to our conversation with Representative Boggs and Senator Williams on ensuring opportunity and fairness in the workplace. I've been asked to address paid family and medical leave. As previously mentioned, I'm the president of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, and we advocate unapologetically for Black women and girls in health, education, economic empowerment, and paid family medical leave is central to the health and economic security for Black women. 28 years ago, former President Clinton signed the Family Medical Leave Act, which is, we know it now as FMLA, which provided workers with unpaid job protected leave to recover from serious medical conditions, provide care for a seriously ill family member, or care for a new child. And while FMLA was a landmark piece of legislation, it fell short of providing many working families with the kind of leave they needed, which is paid leave. Unpaid leave through FMLA is inaccessible to nearly half of US workers because of eligibility restrictions. Women of color are especially harmed by the lack of paid leave, with 61% of Black workers are either ineligible or can't afford to take unpaid FMLA. And while women of color are often the sole breadwinners for their families and also perform the majority of caregiving, they continue to face wage disparities. Black women are typically paid just 65 cents for every dollar paid to white men, and Latinas just 55 cents. The combination of paid inequities and discrimination also means that families of color may be less able to withstand the financial hardship associated with serious medical event and struggle to recover financially afterwards, thereby risking their family's economic security. Paid family leave would support improved health outcomes and could even lower health care costs. Several social determinants of health have been linked to an increased risk of adverse outcomes among vulnerable women. In particular, Maternal stressors such as shift work, high job stress, and high physical demands have been associated with increased risk of negative outcomes among vulnerable infants. As a result, parental work leave has been explored as one strategy to reduce harmful infant health outcomes. And while Ohio's infant mortality rate has shown some decline, the rate of infant deaths in Ohio's Black community remains high, at 2.5 to 3 times higher than the rate of white babies. So policymakers must come to terms with the fact that racism itself, across all socioeconomic levels, as well as any other factor, is part of why Black babies are more likely to die before their first birthdays. Studies have shown that simply being Black can harm a mother's chance of having a healthy baby. Primary health consequences of racism, even for the most successful Blacks, is constant stress and are more vulnerable to health problems, including pregnancy. Loss of income when faced with pregnancy or other health challenges can lead to infant and maternal mortality. Pregnant mothers, as well as all women, experience less stress when they don't have to worry about what will happen economically. Paid family leave would strengthen large and small businesses and support entrepreneurs. In states that have implemented paid family medical leave, businesses report reduction in turnover costs and increased employee loyalty, and little or no impact on profitability and productivity. And then we come to the coronavirus. This pandemic has highlighted the consequences workers face when they lack access to paid leave. In Ohio, Blacks make up 13% of the population. However, Blacks account for 22% of the coronavirus cases and 29% of hospitalizations and 16% of deaths. Blacks have less access to health care, less resources, and less ability to take time off. However, Blacks, particularly Black women, have major responsibility to care for ill or older loved ones and while being responsible for child care, thus the term the sandwich generation. In July of 2020, nearly 1 in 3 mothers ages 25 to 44 and 1 in 8 fathers of the same age were not working due to child care issues. Workers in low-paid, frontline, and essential jobs, disproportionately women of color, experienced high rates of infection and death in part due to workplace exposure and were less likely to have paid leave or the ability to work remotely. Access to paid medical leave would help workers experience less stress from financial insecurity and improve workers' overall health outcomes, and could reduce disability leave and overall healthcare spending, thereby bolstering America's family economic security. With more than 3/4 of voters supporting permanent paid family and medical leave, and the support of President Biden's Build Back Better plan, now is the time to ensure paid medical leave to advance racial and gender equity and ensure the health and economic security of all workers, their families, and the economy in the U.S. and in the state of Ohio, because all policy is local. Thank you.
You're up, Sarah.
All right. Well, I'd love to start by talking about collective bargaining, which is a very fancy term for saying making demands as a group, also known as the collective. And as many of us know, there is power in numbers. The more people you can gather to support your proposal, the more people you can engage in that process, the stronger your proposal and the effort to get it accepted. Our lawmakers know and understand that well. And as workers, and especially as female workers, we also know and understand that well. When we think of collective bargaining, we think of it in the union context, where workers can come together, elect a union to represent them, and allow that union to represent them in contract negotiations with their employer. The members have a voice in that contract, in its contents, and they get to vote on whether the union can agree to the contract on their behalf through a process that's known as contract ratification. It's one of the most democratic things that you can do. Democratizing the workplace is good for all people, but especially the people most taken advantage of and exploited in the workplace. We know that to be true of women workers, of workers of color, and of immigrant workers. These groups of workers are the most likely to suffer as a victim of wage theft, harassment, discrimination in the workplace, and as we've seen from the COVID-19 pandemic, have serious socioeconomic barriers that are difficult, if not impossible, to overcome without some assistance and flexibility on the part of their employer. And some of those are in industries that are the hardest to unionize because of the nature of their work or the transitory nature of their work, like in the service industry, where there's a large proportion of women working, or because of legislators outlawing their ability to do so, like childcare or gig workers. These are typically the workers we're working with at the Central Ohio Worker Center. But union or no union, the underlying fight is still the same. A job is a lifeline for many people. It's what keeps clothes on our families, gas in the car, food on the table. And workers depend upon jobs to make ends meet. But that's also what puts us at risk of exploitation. When workers come together and make demands in the workplace, whether that be for safer working conditions, access to leave, higher and non-discriminatory pay, or against other forms of discrimination and harassment in the workplace, we see meaningful change. But it's hard in today's climate, where collective bargaining rights are constantly under attack by extremists in the State House, their lobbyists, and beyond. And these attacks come freely, and they're well-funded. And they're often led by the very people exploiting our workforce for profit, because power doesn't like to be challenged. But that's exactly what we must do. We have to stand up and challenge it. And that's not an unpopular fight. Well over a majority, 65% in fact, of individuals in the United States actually approve of labor unions. 65% approve of labor unions. And 48% of US workers have stated that they'd vote yes to join a union if given the opportunity. 48%. However, we have around 12.1% union density in this country. Only 12.1% of US workers actually belong to a union. For comparison, in 1969, nearly 27% of the workforce, a little over 1 in 4 workers, was a union member. And this decline in unionization has ravaged our communities and the stability and upward mobility of our working families. And that's no accident. While unions quite literally built the middle class, corporate greed, regressive tax and economic policies, and anti-union tactics and laws have substantially destroyed the gains made and fought for by US workers. From 1979 to 2017, the median hourly wage has declined 7.9%, and the wage gap between earners in the 90th percentile of wage distribution and the 50th percentile of wage distribution has widened. Worker productivity has skyrocketed, but workers continue to share in less and less of that profit. Meanwhile, owners and bosses in comfy offices and exotic locales stash these profits away in their private coffers, only to pull them back out to fight the working people merely demanding fair treatment and a slice of the American dream that their own labor is creating. And the cycle continues, and our families and our communities suffer. But we're not helpless. In fact, as workers and worker advocates and as women workers, we are powerful beyond measure. And we're seeing this power rise and people's own sense of self and sense of community shine into what is becoming a diverse and powerful worker-led movement. People are waking up to how things are and are dreaming about how things ought to be. We're building power in the streets and in the workplace. And we're making it known that we want safe working conditions, fair treatment, and a share in the profit that our own work helps create. However, we can't do that without our fearless legislators and elected officials having our backs, supporting us in our struggles and in our demands, and helping uplift our stories and our needs. It will be a fight because power will not concede power on its own, but it will be a fight worth having, as it will affect the most amount of people and the people that need the support the most. I'm so grateful to be here today, and I'm hopeful for the future that we want to create and that we will create.
Well, thank you so much, ladies. I love the way that Linda talks about unapologetically advocating, because I think that is so important, that when we're for these change and when we taking back power, like Sarah described, that we need to do so with a position of strength. And so would love to hear from you. We only have a quick time for Q&A at this point, but would love from here to you. What are the most important pieces of legislation that we should be advocating for in this General Assembly right now?
Well, for me, what I just spoke about is paid family and medical leave, because of the adverse impact it has on Black women, particularly Black women in low wage earning positions, and to allow for flexibility in work schedules. The other thing is the child care tax credit. I think is vitally important to the economic stability, because child care oftentimes is the largest financial obligation that families have and impede their ability to work. And then the other is raising the minimum wage. That is the overlay to everything, to all of our economic security. So those are the three issues that the National Coalition of 100 Black Women have been advocating for a long time now, and we've been fortunate to have partnered with Rep. Boggs on a number of occasions at our legislative day, and are really, really proud of that relationship. But those are the three priorities for the coalition.
I'll just add really quickly. I agree. Childcare is absolutely, I think, the number one thing to get women back to work right now, especially with House Bill 145 to increase that eligibility to 200% of the federal poverty level. That's really important. And I know that there's some budget amendments to push it a little closer to that as well. So I definitely agree there. I would also say, just in addition to what Linda added, is, we're talking about fairness and workplace fairness here in this conversation today. And I think that there's a couple, equal pay legislation on the table right now, as well as barring discrimination in the form of salary history and asking people for those sorts of things. So as women are getting back to work, let's make sure that they start with the best foot forward as they re-enter the workforce.
And I think I would echo everything that has been said, so I won't reiterate that. But I did want to draw attention to the pay stub bill that would essentially require employers to give pay stubs. It's incredibly important. You need a pay stub to get housing. You need a pay stub to have a bank account. You need a pay stub in order to bring a claim against your employer. And it's a major hindrance for not only justice, but for things that we need in our basic lives. So I would really advocate for that. And then just generally, conformity and increasing visibility on misclassification of work. Independent contractor is a very favored employment position these days, but not everybody is actually an independent contractor. And the thing that happens when you are not an independent contractor, but being treated as one, is you are ineligible for things like unemployment compensation, workers' compensation. You do not have Title VII protections. So you can't bring a lawsuit against your employer for that purpose. There are a number of other protections that you're lacking because you are being misclassified, on top of wage theft and other economic impacts that has on you. And just generally, I would say defense of collective bargaining rights. I mean, collective bargaining is constantly under attack, and that's one of the strongest tools that we have. And if we have strong collective bargaining, a lot of the things like minimum wage and other things that we're constantly fighting for, we won't have to fight for because we can bargain for them. So making that really strong is something that I would definitely advocate for.
Thank you so much for your comments, Sarah, Tanya, and Linda. We really appreciate it. The next question is, as experts in this space who are also advocates, what are the arguments you found most effective in helping the legislature who, in some light, does not want to believe what you have just presented to us? What do you find most effective in helping members of the legislature understand this problem? Who'd like to go first?
I can jump in. So I think that when it comes to especially framing these sorts of issues against anyone that maybe isn't necessarily aligned, I think making the business case is easy. There's data available to do that. I look at, for instance, paid family leave. It is good for businesses. It's really good for small businesses. And I think there's a lot of information to back that. And when you're thinking about improving the lives of all Ohioans, we're much better off with a healthy economy, with workers that are happy, satisfied, and supported. And so, as we get women back to work, as we work on all of these issues, I think that there's a clear business case, and we should absolutely make it to sway the other side.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that too. I think you really need to talk from a position of the bottom line for businesses, and reduction of women leaving the workforce without paid leave. It's like, a 35% drop for after a woman gives birth. So if you're not creating an environment for women to return to the workforce, that creates a higher turnover. It increases the cost to the business of rehiring and retraining. That has an impact on their businesses. And opposite when research that's been done from states that have enacted paid family medical leave, as I mentioned earlier, they have not realized any reduction in profitability or productivity. So it really is not causing harm to businesses. So employers could experience cost savings if employees return to work, as opposed to quitting and leaving the job force positions altogether. And also the paid family medical leave, it's funded or could be funded through payroll taxes. So it's not necessarily an additional financial burden on the employer. So I think if we point those factors out and how it impacts their bottom line, there may be a little less resistant to that. And also the requirement of the less than 50 employees, but not more than 500 employees, really closes a lot of businesses, particularly small businesses, out from even offering this as a benefit to employees, which again increases the turnover. And I think it's also been a driver of preventing women from returning to the labor market, particularly on the heels of COVID.
Thank you.
Case can be made.
Mm-hmm.
And I would echo everything everyone just said. I think a good example of using the business line is in workers' compensation legislation that has been introduced that would exclude undocumented workers from workers' compensation benefits. But really what that's going to do is act as a stereotype and dog whistle, and encourage people to use and abuse undocumented workers because do not have to pay into Bureau of Workers' Compensation funds for them. And that actually affects documented workers because it's putting this underground labor market out there that's going to hurt the above ground labor market, and that's going to hurt our system as a whole, hurt communities as a whole, hurt those workers certainly. And it's just not good for anyone. It's not ethical. So I think kind of relaying that information is helpful. I would also say the storytelling is one of the most powerful things that we have. And if our legislators need backup and assistance, we can help collect that, right, as a community, and bring those stories forward. So just keeping that process open and using your constituents, because we want to see these things happen. So yeah, all of that.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I am going to turn it back over to Representative Boggs. I just want to say that We really appreciate what you do in the community, and we look forward to working with you. So Representative Boggs.
Thank you. Ladies, you are a wealth of knowledge. Appreciate all that you do to support Ohio, support our community, and support us as we try to do this work in the legislature. Your efforts are so important to us making even the incremental amounts of headway that we're able to do, and you can't thank you enough. So I'm getting word that we have run past our time a little bit, so we can sign off, but truly thank you for all you do, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you as well.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would help women in our state by increasing minimum wage to $15 an hour to give more people the opportunity for a better life.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a resolution urging Congress to enact the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act to shine a light on the racism and inequity that is still present in the United States today.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would designate the 4th week of June as Postpartum Cardiomyopathy Awareness Week to raise awareness for this rare but deadly disease which affects pregnant women and mothers. I will also continue to introduce and support legislation to increase educational and economic opportunities for women.
I am a woman still rising by introducing House Bill 145 to increase eligibility levels for federally funded child care, allow more women to return to work and more young Ohioans to receive high-quality child care and enter kindergarten ready to learn.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would ensure equal pay for equal work and close the gender pay gap.
Hey, Congressman Tim Ryan here. Want to say hello to everybody participating in the Ohio Women's Lobby Day with the theme, Ohio Women Still Rising. I love it. Just so many issues that I know you're going to talk about today that we need to keep advocating for. We need to keep supporting, organizing around so many issues, especially with the pandemic and post-pandemic. We've really seen women really in this state have suffered more than anyone else, whether it was at work or home. We've seen so many women have to deal with circumstances that were very, very difficult. And I want you all to know that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm here to join arm in arm with all of you to continue to fight. We're talking about issues around gun violence. We're talking about women's health. We're protecting the woman's right to choose. These are issues that I will stand by you and work with you and fight with you for, both here in Ohio and across the country. There are so many issues around health, especially African American women, around pregnancy, issues around infant mortality. We're trying in DC to really make a commitment and let the people of this state and country see what we are committed to, that we believe in family values, and making sure that people have access to quality health care, that it's affordable, that the health disparities are something that we have to deal with. Unacceptable. So we've got a lot of work ahead. Look forward to working with all of you. I want to thank Allison Russo for getting me to do this and connecting me to this group, but so proud of all the work that you're doing. The fight has just begun. I really do believe, if I could say quickly, that I believe we're at a real crossroads in the country and in the state. You're talking about these issues. We got to decide whether or not we're going to move forward in the future together, whether we're going to make sure there's opportunity for everyone, making sure that everyone's cut in on the deal, or we're going to double down on the past of inequality and discrimination and all of the issues that we saw highlighted really during the pandemic, that the pandemic really pulled the veil on so many of these issues. I believe that we have the courage to move forward together to dominate the industries of the future, to have a more just and equal society. That's going to be for us to determine. That's what these elections are about, and that's what you're lobbying for today. And I look forward to being a part of that with you. So have a great day.
Good afternoon. And I just want to say thank you to everyone who is still tuned in to Women's Lobby Day. I am Erica Crawley. I am state representative for the Ohio's 26th House District, which is East and Southeast Columbus. I have the honor of moderating this panel with State Representative Tavia Golansky, and I'll allow her to introduce herself real quick.
Hi, everybody. I'm State Representative Tavia Golansky, and I represent Ohio's 35th District, which covers the portions of Akron, and the interesting representative with you, Representative Crawley.
Thank you, Representative Golansky. So we have a dynamic panel today to discuss improving women's health and well-being. The policy topics will be Black maternal health, racism as a public health crisis, reproductive rights, and the intersection of gun violence and violence against women. And so our panelists today are the awesome Jessica Roach, who is the co-founder and executive director of Root. We have Lauren Blauvelt Copeland, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Advocacy at Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio. And then we also have Lisa Voigt, who is an advocate for the chapter of Moms Demand Action. And before we get into the panel and the questions, and Rep. Golansky will ask the questions of our panelists, let me just set the stage real quick about the topics that we are going to discuss this afternoon. So without access to adequate comprehensive health care and treatment, the goal of economic security is cut short before it begins. But affordable coverage and care are out of reach for many. 7% of Ohio women between the ages of 19 and 64 lack health insurance altogether. And women of color are more likely to be uninsured, which represents barriers to accessing preventative and primary health care and contributes to persistent health disparities, such as higher rates of diabetes, pregnancy-related complications, and cervical and breast cancer than white women. Black women also face disproportionately higher rates of pregnancy-related deaths. The United States is the most dangerous developed nation in the world for women to give birth. And Ohio faces a maternal mortality rate above the national average. Nationally, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related deaths compared to white women as a result of racial disparities in access to and quality of care. Discrimination and implicit bias in the healthcare system experienced before, during, and after pregnancy, and stress and trauma associated with structural and institutional racism. Although many women presently rely on reproductive health services, ideological legislative agendas have impeded access to abortion and other reproductive health care services, and access is not distributed evenly. Restrictions to abortion access in Ohio disproportionately hurt women of color, low-income women, and women living in rural areas. Gun violence in all forms, community violence, police violence, suicide, domestic violence, and mass shootings also increases the toxic stress women face in their communities and daily lives. COVID-19 has only increased the barriers to health and well-being, and women are facing incredible pressures that are detrimental to their physical and mental health outcomes. And with that, we are going to turn it over to our panelists, who have 5 minutes each to tell us a little bit more about themselves and the work that they're doing, and to talk about our policy topics today as experts. Jessica, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Representative Crawley. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to be on with our panelists today. My name again is Jessica Roach. I am actually the CEO and partner at Restoring Our Own Through Transformation, also known as Root. We are a Black family-led, community-based organization dedicated to addressing overall Black family health and decreasing the Black maternal and infant mortality rate, not only here in Central Ohio, but we also do a significant amount of work throughout the state and also with our federal partners. So one of the things that we are most concerned about, obviously, is making sure that we really address this from a health equity lens and understand that the intersection of the social injustices that occur in our communities are what are actually leading to what we consider some of these social determinants of health. We look at this from a structural determinant place and really look to address institutional racism, misnomers, and health communication in order to address some of these what are considered health disparities that are in our community. Root currently sits at a 0% Black maternal and infant mortality rate. And that has a great deal to do with what we are most known for, which is our perinatal support doula core. That is our primary for our direct services. Our perinatal support doulas offer the opportunity to be able to be with families, not only during their pregnancy, labor and delivery and postpartum services, but also during those intrapartum services, and often for family planning services when families are just starting to talk about whether or not they're wanting to create a family, and really addressing some of those tenets of reproductive justice, which is the how, where, when, and if we do choose, and being able to incorporate levels of safety and sustainability within our communities. So there's a great deal that goes along with that. Our second arm is really dealing within policy and advocacy. And so we're doing a substantial amount of work, and we'll talk about this a bit later, around doula reimbursement, Medicaid doula reimbursement in the state of Ohio, and then as well as working with our national partners on the Momnibus as well, our federal partners in the Momnibus. And then we do have our third arm, which is our health education component. Our health education component really is geared more towards healthcare practitioners, and want to be really clear. We are very specific about working in an anti-Black racism lens. So we do not do necessarily implicit bias training. We're very clear about addressing racism as a public health issue, understanding that the issues that impact our Black families, not only in our community, but across the nation, have to do with looking at racism as the health risk factor and not race itself. And then also being really clear about making sure that there are levels of communication that do happen, not only throughout the healthcare practitioners, but in health administration as well, and how that often impacts our Black families. So and we make sure that we do this in a very holistic way. So while they are considered our three separate branches of our organization, they all work in tandem. We understand that this is not just a siloed issue, that it is not something that can be easily addressed by simply looking at it from the perspective of the social determinants. We have to be really clear, especially when we're talking about Black women, Black families, Black infants, that even across socioeconomic lines, we still are seeing some of these disparity gaps, and in certain situations they grow. And we know that that has to do more with the stress and the physiological impact on our bodies from levels of racism that do occur, not only just in the healthcare situation, but in our daily lives. And so that is how we take a look at it, and how we have been addressing this in our organization. We have been in an organization since 2017. So we are going on our fourth year, and we very much look forward to being able to serve our community in more significant ways as we move in the future.
Thank you, Jessica, for that introduction. Looking forward to the question and answer portion and learning more about Root. Lauren, you are up next.
Thank you so much, Representative Crawley, for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Lauren Blauvelt Copeland. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Advocacy for Planned Parenthood Advocates of Ohio, and we represent in policy and advocacy the Planned Parenthood affiliates throughout the state, and in reproductive health care and education. This last decade, Ohioans have experienced a constant decrease to their reproductive rights and access to reproductive health care. The Republican-controlled State House has passed 25 abortion bans and restrictions, forcing their extreme ideas on people's personal medical decisions, inserting themselves between a patient and their doctor, and ignoring the needs of families and communities. These laws have led to the closure of half of Ohio's abortion providers, increased wait times, cost, and the need to travel farther. These burdens are inequitable, and they impact people of color, people with low incomes, and people living in rural areas more deeply. Legislation went into effect in 2019, defunding Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers from state funding for preventative health care and education services, and additional restrictions keep other organizations from being able to work with abortion providers, or they could lose funding. These attacks on reproductive health care and reproductive justice are continuing, In this current budget cycle, funding was supposed to be allocated to Root, who has, as Jessica just told us, a 0% infant mortality program. Root's funding was taken out of the budget because reproductive freedom is a value they share. This country continues to deny Black women reproductive freedom, starting with slavery and medical experimentation, and there is still forced sterilization happening to Black and brown people, most recently reported in Georgia's ICE detention center. It is important that we name how egregious it is for Ohio Republican lawmakers to deny an organization led by Black women, Black families, serving Black women and Black families, an investment in their life-affirming programs for trusting Black women to make their own decisions about their bodies and families. And instead, funding continues to go to crisis pregnancy centers. They do not have measurable outcomes and are known to mislead and misinform pregnant people seeking help. Right now, $6 million is allocated in this budget to crisis pregnancy centers, with another $2 million going to abstinence-only miseducation. These programs put ideology and politics ahead of medical and scientific best practice and leave young people without the information and access they need to make informed decisions about their bodies, sex and sexuality, and healthy relationships. This is the exact opposite of what Ohioans are calling for, and it has been exacerbated during the pandemic. As an essential healthcare provider, Planned Parenthood stayed open, continuing to serve our patients through the pandemic. We have expanded our services to include both hypertension and type 2 diabetes screening, including self-management education as part of our wellness exams. Planned Parenthood now offers gender-affirming hormone replacement therapy, and starting June 1st, we'll provide the spectrum of gender-affirming care through telehealth. Our patients can access healthcare through telehealth, and now so can students. Ohio Center for Sex Education has completely virtual programs reaching even more classrooms and communities with medically accurate, age-appropriate, comprehensive sexuality education, and our peer education programs for high schoolers has its largest enrollment yet. Ohio legislators should be investing in more access to reproductive health care, in reproductive justice, and comprehensive sex education, and much more to combat racism specifically as a public health crisis and support Ohioans, communities, and families instead of creating barriers by banning abortion and cutting or limiting funding to organizations working towards reproductive freedom. That's why we really appreciate working with our legislative champions on expanding access to reproductive health care and so much more, and really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Lauren. And thank you for pointing out the fact that the legislature did remove funding for Root just because they Googled the website and took or saw that it said reproductive freedom. And so I say, if you do what you always did, you'll get what you always got. And so not centering, this organization who has been doing the work and saving lives is just unfortunate. So looking forward to hearing more about your work. We just had a conversation the other day, which was really great, and looking forward to supporting you, and the callers who are tuned in probably are excited about learning more and seeing how they can support you in your work. So next up, we have Lisa. Lisa, can you come on and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel with experts. I'm here really as a volunteer with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We are a grassroots, nonpartisan organization with 6 million supporters, both mothers and others, dedicated to gun violence prevention through education, community partner support, and legislative advocacy. It's especially an honor to be here with two representatives who just participated in our own advocacy day a few weeks ago. In the last 2 years that I've served as a legislative lead for the Ohio chapter, I've learned that no matter when I sit down to write an email, a social media post, or testimony on a gun bill in the Ohio legislature, there will always be an incident of gun violence in the news, something that just happened that's connected to the issue I'm writing about. And today is no different. Yesterday in Colorado Springs, a man shot and killed his girlfriend, 5 other people, and himself at a birthday party on Mother's Day. Incredibly, This was one of 9 mass shootings in the US this weekend. This is the tragic reality we know we are living and dying with here in the US, and one that is uniquely dangerous for American women, especially women of color, and one that has become even more devastating in the COVID-19 pandemic. I've seen some people say that one of the signs of our emergence from the pandemic is the increasing frequency of mass shootings like this. But shootings did not stop during the pandemic. In fact, 2020 was the deadliest year for gun violence in decades, killing approximately 44,000 people. This is significantly higher than the average of 100 per day that we in Moms are used to reciting. Here in Ohio, gun deaths have increased 34% from 2010 to 2019. This is compared to 17% nationwide. That is double the rate of increase nationwide. We don't have the statistics yet for 2020, but I expect both of these numbers will show an exponential increase. Here in Columbus, I believe we're up to 68 homicides already, which will make for another record-breaking year. We don't often talk about the economic cost of gun violence because the human cost is so devastating in itself. But gun deaths and injuries cost Ohio $11 billion per year, of which $486 million is paid by us, by taxpayers. Numbers like these can be numbing, but let me share a few more that particularly pertain to women. And like the ones I've already shared, these are mostly taken from Everytown Research, which Moms Demand Action is a part of. So access to a gun makes it 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed by an intimate partner. Every month, an average of 57 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner. And over half of mass shootings in the past decade have involved the shooting of a current or former intimate partner, just as occurred in the Colorado Springs shooting yesterday. It's important to point out that the risks are not borne equally by all races and ethnicities. Black, Indigenous, and Hispanic women experience the highest rates of intimate partner violence and homicides. Black women ages 18 to 34 are nearly 3 times more likely to be shot and killed by an intimate partner than white women in the same age group. The disproportionate impact on other women of color, the LGBTQ population, and people with disabilities is often difficult to measure because of underreporting or underrecording. Many studies have shown how communities with histories of discrimination, police violence, high poverty rates, less access to protective services, and lack of trust in law enforcement and the criminal justice system all can be factors in these disparities. Domestic violence is not, of course, the only way that gun violence affects women. And so in recognition of Mother's Day yesterday, I want to close by noting how it impacts mothers. We could talk about unintentional shootings by children when guns are not stored safely, locked, and unloaded. This has surged 31% in 2020 because of the surge in gun sales and the fact that so many children were home from school. We could talk about incidents of shooting in schools or on school grounds. There were 6 in a single day last week. We could talk about the exponential rise of firearm suicide among children and teens, which is most dramatically among Black adolescents, increased 73% from 1991 to 2017. And this Saturday, the organization Mothers of Murdered Columbus Children, founded by Melissa Thomas St. Clair here in Columbus, hosted a beautiful event in a park for some 35 Columbus women whose children have been killed, mostly by guns. This organization is like many of those throughout the country whose leaders were recently profiled in a New York Times op-ed and set of interviews entitled, "Black Mothers Are the Real Experts on the Toll of Gun Violence." Listening to and supporting women like these is part of the work that we do in Moms Demand Action with our community partners like MOMCC. We were really honored to support that event on Saturday. And another, of course, is legislative advocacy. And I look forward to talking more about some of the legislation that would have an impact on reducing the toll of gun violence on Black women and all women in the state of Ohio. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. For that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Representative Galonsky, who's going to handle our question and answer panel.
Thank you so much. I will be here tonight. So I'm really grateful to Root, I'm grateful to Planned Parenthood, and also to Moms Demand Action in Everytown for coming here today to share the information. Really, what I'd like to dive into, if I could, is finding out more about reversing this trend of defunding women and children, because that's really what it's all about, is taking away our civility and health. So let's begin. What do you say is the most immediate and urgent issue the legislature should address if we want to improve women's health and well-being? A bill or a legislative idea? Who'd like to go first?
I'm happy to go first because, as you know, we had our lobby day, so we were talking about specific bills, and one of the bills that I was thrilled that we were able to talk about is the Extreme Risk Protection Order Act that was introduced by Representatives Allison Russo and Monique Smith and members of this caucus and co-sponsored by Representative Crowley. And this would, so it's HB 257 in the House, and of course there's a Senate version as well, Senate Bill 138. This would really have an impact on reducing everything from suicides to mass shootings to domestic violence. It helps to keep guns out of the hands of people who pose an imminent danger to themselves or others, and builds on something we already have, which is the protection orders system. It has bipartisan support nationwide, and we had really productive conversations last week about this. So there are others that I could talk about, but I'll let Lauren share if she'd like, or Jessica.
Either Lauren or Jessica, who would like to go next, letting us know what we should be paying most attention to as legislators, the most immediate and urgent issue we should be addressing.
I can jump in. We definitely have to reverse, just like you said, Representative Blonsky, reverse the decade of defunding family and children and reproductive health care. I will specifically lift up overturning the defunding of abortion providers. Specifically, I think that I know that Jessica will talk about this more, but investing in Black maternal health, and specifically Representative Crawley's bills around Medicaid being able to pay for doula care is so important. And really, we have to codify the right to abortion and ensure in doing so that access, everyone can access it, including no matter your income or your insurance provider. So it's really essential that Medicaid also pay for abortion services.
Excellent. I really appreciate that. And now, Jessica, are you able to weigh in though about the most immediate thing that our legislature can do to help with women's health and well-being instead of hurting us?
Absolutely. My apologies, I have a bit of difficulty breaking up a bit. So just an FYI. I think that for us, I know that we've had a great deal of discussion, not only about what is the immediate legislation and bills that we would like to see passed. Two of them I'll mention currently is 142 and 42, which is the Save Our Mothers Act, as well as doula reimbursement, Medicaid reimbursement for doulas. So those are immediate that we see that need to be passed, but also being really clear about how passing this legislation and working in what we consider those aspects of allyship really come into play. So ultimately, it's not just about the pieces of legislation that we can develop, but how are we going to actually establish what would really be considered the equitable funding that would happen under establishing some of these regulations through this legislation, and being really clear about making sure that organizations like CBOs, in particular Black-led CBOs, are able to have the level of autonomy to be able to do the work that they need to do. So in essence, being able to utilize the legislation to allow for the autonomy and freedom for the CBOs to continue to do the work that we have already been doing without some of these support systems, but then be able to do it in a place where we're not becoming overly regulated so that our programs change and therefore we're not necessarily achieving the same outcomes.
That's excellent. Just really appreciate it. And sure enough, when you ask experts to participate, they often anticipate the next question, and so they answer it. So my next question was, why would these bills be helpful to women and their well-being? And I'm pretty sure you all three of you already answered that. So let's move on then. As experts in this space, we're also advocates. What are the arguments you found most effective in helping the legislature understand the problem at hand and the necessity of proposed solution? Why don't you go ahead and get started then, Lisa?
Okay. So we have found that talking about focusing on gun suicide, for example, is very effective at talking to legislators who may be concerned about anything that would be an infringement of the Second Amendment. We do support the Second Amendment, but we support responsible gun ownership and gun safety. And there's just no way around the fact that, if 61% of gun deaths in the state of Ohio are suicides, firearm suicides, and we know that suicide by a firearm leaves no second chance. 90% of suicides are completed if a firearm is used. These were really effective conversations we found last week, and that's why we really wanted to focus on the Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, which would have an impact in so many ways of keeping guns out of the hands of people who are an imminent danger to themselves or others without infringing on responsible gun owners' rights. There are this is all following due process, so I would say those were very effective. We find that talking to legislators through these meetings, offering testimony, really has managed to, you would think that on an issue like guns, that no middle ground can be found. Sometimes the discourse seems so polarized, but when you speak directly about the impact on people's lives, on what is happening, sharing stories, but also data, this combination, it really is effective. And we actually had a case of we changed someone's mind about stand your ground last session through testimony. Not that that was enough to stop that very dangerous bill from passing. I'm grateful that members of this caucus have introduced repeal of stand your ground. But it shows us that it is effective to have these conversations. I'll stop there.
I agree completely, and I love what you're illustrating for the whole audience out there is that advocacy works. If we stay connected and we stay engaged, and in particular, if we have the conversations that we sometimes really comfortable having, then advocacy can make a difference. So I appreciate you pointing out those important arguments. How about tossing it over to Lauren? What arguments have you found to be most effective in helping the legislature understand the problem at hand and the necessity of whatever it is you're advocating for?
Yeah. I think it's really important to make sure everyone knows that even though there have been 25 abortion bans and restrictions passed, that makes it seem as though access to abortion and reproductive health care, that there is really a divide between Ohioans and wanting access, when really it's a small minority who happen to have the majority of the legislation and legislators. So we have to look at democracy reform and gerrymandering when we're looking at these extreme bills that continue to be passed. In fact, sometimes it seems as though the only thing the Republican Party is willing to get together to pass bills on is to attack abortion again and again, when really, even if you are talking to any Ohioan, they'll let you know that they want to be in charge of their own personal medical decisions. They do not want the Ohio legislator to be making a decision as important about whether or not they're going to, have a family or continue their pregnancy, and that is really meaningful for Ohioans, and we really appreciate the champions who are working with us, particularly in the Women's Caucus, because we know it's really difficult, and we have to stand together and continue to fight these bills, because right now we're not getting anywhere with the current Republican Party. But like I said, Ohioans, they want access to the full reproductive health care service, including abortion, and they cannot continue to say that they care about families and they care about mothers and they care about babies if they're not going to be investing in organizations like Root and even still organizations like Planned Parenthood.
That's such an important point, Laurie. families want. And so I really appreciate you pointing that out, Lauren. And then if we have time, I think we still have time, why don't we take it over then to back to Jessica to see if you can offer something to us. What are the most effective arguments you've heard, Jessica, which will help when you're trying to help the legislature to understand the problem? I can recognize that it must be incredibly frustrating for you to put your group forward and to find out that the legislature thought it was a good idea to defund your efforts simply because they understand the totality of your mission. And so what if anything would you like to say to the group as far as most effective arguments of helping the legislature understand?
I think ultimately what would be most important in being able to help the legislature understand the work that we're doing is being very clear about how it is there is a significant spectrum of what reproductive health care means, and the ability to be able to care for our families has to be an all-encompassed conversation. It cannot be siloed simply into discussing what, when we're talking about Black infant mortality, it can't simply be discussed in the context of how it is that a child lives to be a year old without actually having a conversation about the intersection of law enforcement violence and how it's killing families. And it's also taking our children away from us. That is another mortality statistic. It's being able to be really clear that reproductive freedom encompasses that type of conversation where we should be allowed to live in safe and sustainable communities and have the freedom to not only choose how it is that we create our families, but we are allowed to be able to continue to be safe inside of the communities that we live in and not have to worry about our children experiencing this simply because they're walking down the street, or they're inside of a system that may not have protected them in the appropriate way, or that we're looking at it from the perspective of Black family health overall means that we need to make sure that we have mothers and fathers and aunties that are still here with us and not becoming victims of law enforcement violence. Those are difficult concepts for individuals to be able to pull together, but it is the reality of our daily life. And it's not just that. It's talking about redlining from the real perspective of building generational wealth. It's talking about, again, health inequities that have been created and are rooted in these structural determinants that have been created by policy over time that have led to what we consider the social determinants of health now, and how it is those things that actually impact what our rates are. When you're talking about in Franklin County, we're at 11.4 per 1,000 for Black infant mortality. And while part of the discussion is that those numbers have dropped, we still have an actual increase in what the health disparate gap is between Black infants and white infants. Our measures when it comes to Black maternal mortality need to be much more specific, clear, and disaggregated, because the story is not completely told. And I think that it's absolutely necessary, and what we need to communicate that with legislation, that we need to be able to have those measures that are put in place that will allow us to have the specific information that we need so that we can address this from the perspective of our community and by our community.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for that answer. Thank you again to our panelists. I think, we can't underscore how much everything that we do in the legislature impacts health, impacts families, ability to thrive and not just survive. We have codified racism and discrimination. Law enforcement violence is a public health crisis, and we cannot forget that and leave that out as well. And talk about the historic context of how we got to be where we are today, where COVID-19 just highlighted that, which we already knew to be true. And so thank you to my co-moderator, Representative Golansky. Always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for the work that you all do every day, and supporting us in the legislature, trying to make change and make progress. We could not do it without your work and your advocacy. And so with that, I would just like to say thank you again to everyone who tuned in, and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
I'm a woman still rising, and I am introducing a bill that would put universal preschool for any 4 or 5-year-old in Ohio on the ballot.
I'm a woman still rising,
And I introduced extreme risk protection order gun safety legislation to protect women, families, and children from people who pose a threat to others.
I am a woman still rising, and I helped secure $2.5 million for domestic violence services funding in the state's budget.
I'm a woman still rising, and I introduced a bill that would protect domestic violence victims by allowing them to terminate their lease agreements harm-free.
I am a woman still rising, and I introduced the Caregiver Expenses Tax Credit. House Bill 79 provides a tax credit for certain expenses incurred by a family caregiver during the care and support of a loved one age 18 or older who requires assistance. This tax credit will give much needed financial relief to our hardworking Ohio women and families.
Hi, I'm Dayton Mayor Nan Whaley, and I'm super honored to get to greet you all from the House Democratic Women's Caucus. And as we think of the past year of COVID, of civil unrest, and the issues that have come before our communities and our families, I can't help but think how women have borne the brunt of all of the issues coming forward. Whether it's figuring out what to do with children and childcare and school, it comes before women. Figuring out how to manage that with work, women. How to bring forward our community together. Have been women making the difference in at least my community and communities across the state. Thank you for all you do to bring these issues to the forefront in a place that is actually too often male-dominated. You're making a great difference, making sure that the voices of women, the majority of our state, are listened to. I know it can be difficult and it can be hard, but certainly during the pandemic, it is important now more than ever. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone that joined us today for the Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus Lobby Day. And before we conclude, I just want to say a special thank you to the following people. To all the members of the Ohio Democratic Women's Legislative Caucus, including my fellow executive committee members, Representative Tavia Golonsky, Representative Allison Russo, Representative Mary Lightbody, and Representative Monique Smith. And also, thank you to Representative Juanita Brent, who is on the Women's Lobby Day planning team. And thank you to our wonderful, wonderful legislative aides, Hunter, Uma, and Benjamin. Thank you. We could not have done this without you. And also to our wonderful House Minority Caucus Constituents Outreach Coordinator, Maya. And also a very special thank you to Leader Sykes, Senator Sherrod Brown, Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, Congressman Tim Ryan, and last but not least, Mayor Nan Whaley, providing our video messages for today. And of course, thank you to our panelists for your participation. And also to the person behind the scenes, thank you, Carolyn Kane, with Talk Track presentations. And we couldn't have done it without our wonderful, wonderful videos from the Ohio channel. Today you have heard the phrase, "I'm a woman still rising," over and over again. Women are rising above challenges because even though we are half the population of the state, we face obstacles each and every day that hindered our ability to get ahead and work to eventually retire with safety and security. This is just the beginning. Use the program you've received to help advocate the change at the state level to the best of your ability. And again, thank you and have a great day. And we are Women Still Rising.